And welcome back to another episode of the Bleav Georgia Tech podcast. We're your co-hosts. That is RJ Schaefer. I am Jackson Caldell. Coming to you, it's May 1st, Wednesday afternoon. Got a little transfer portal talk. We're going to talk, obviously, the NFL draft was last weekend. We had some Tech guys sign as undrafted guys, get some mini camp invites. We're going to discuss that. But the big topic today is going to kind of be our first ACC win totals look. And it's not we're picking over-unders right now, but it's kind of like, okay, here's how Vegas sees the ACC race as we stand right now, because transfer portal's closed. This is the rosters that these teams have is pretty much what's going to be set in stone. You might see a few transfers commit here and there because all you have to do is be in the portal. You don't have to be committed by yesterday. But before we get into all that, RJ, how you doing, man?
Feeling great, man. It feels like every single time we're on here, I say it's been a minute, but it really has. This is probably the longest gap we've had in a long time.
Yeah. So, NFL draft, how did I have to say, are you feeling better about the way your Packers drafted than my team drafted?
100%. 100%.
There's not many teams that should be able to say they drafted worse than the Falcons, but maybe there's a few out there. But that's an NFL topic. We talk Georgia Tech here. So a couple of transfer, like we said, we're going to lead off with some transfer portal talk. So yesterday, football got a commitment from Illinois cornerback Zachary Tobe. He played a lot as a true freshman last year. Got some pretty good PFF grades. Again, I don't know how many people put a ton of stock into that, but I think it's at least a decent benchmark to look at. A young player, he's coming into a position that needed some bodies in it. I was tweeting about this yesterday. Like, the cornerback room kind of looks pretty good after the portal ends. And we're going to talk about the roster next week, kind of just to let the transfer stuff kind of filter out. But you add Warren Burrell and Saeed Gibbs, who both went through spring practice and both had good reviews. Warren Burrell, we talked about him having a pretty good spring game. You add this kid in now along with Amari Harvey and Rodney Shelley. Like, that's a group on defense that I think that's gotten better. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, and we kind of talked about having not much improvement on the defense. But after going through spring, I think this secondary overall in general, even if you include safeties, is on par or a lot better than they were last year.
Yeah. I think our questions rely on the front end of the defense, but we'll get into that a little bit more next week. Transitioning over to basketball, Damon Stoudemire was able to get Colorado forward Luke O'Brien, who was one of the best three-point shooters in the transfer portal. He committed, I believe it was either last week or the week before. It's been since we last recorded an episode. So, look, I think it was a good addition. Does he automatically make you an ACC title contender? Probably not. But for a team that took, I think Georgia Tech was fourth in three-point attempts taken last year, but they were 13th in percentage. They were at the bottom. For a team that wants to shoot threes, it helps to have three-point shooters. And I think O'Brien does that. He was one of the like I said, one of the better three-point shooters in the portal. Do you have any thoughts on him as where he fits in with the roster?
Yeah, I liked it a lot because when we think about last year, there was kind of this lack of spacing, and we never really had one specific guy who was always a spot up shooter. I mean, obviously, you would have guys who would have games, Nate George and Miles Kelly,
Right.
most obviously, but, he brings something that Damon Stoudemire has been looking for, which is shooting. So I think it's actually a really underrated transfer, and I think he'll bring a lot more value than people think.
Yeah. The other basketball thing we need to talk about. So we kind of skated around it a little bit. There was some news maybe 3 weeks ago of Miles Kelly possibly entering the draft. That kind of went unconfirmed. But last week, he did decide to enter the draft while maintaining his eligibility, while entering the transfer portal, while also saying he might return to Georgia Tech. So there was kind of, long story short, Miles Kelly is in the portal while also declaring for the draft, and he's still considering coming back to Tech. It's a little different than what he did last year because he didn't enter the portal last year. He just went into the draft, kept his eligibility open. I would love to have Miles Kelly back on the team. I think he took a slight step back on offense last year, but he did make some defensive improvements. I think it's all going to be considering what does his draft feedback look like. because me and you talked. We made the same point when Brian Dongo declared for the draft but maintained his eligibility. This is a weak NBA draft. As somebody that does cover the NBA on a daily basis, I can tell you from reading what other people say and just the consensus opinion around the league is it's a bad draft. That's why there's always a chance that I don't think Miles Kelly would go in the first round. You could see a team take a flyer on him in the second round because he has shown a potential to be a volume scorer, and he does have athletic ability at a position that a lot of NBA teams covet. Same thing with Ndongo. Like there's some upside there if you just want to take a shot in the second round and say, all right, we'll roll the dice on Miles Kelly and see what happens. It's just going to be a waiting game. But the thing here is like Ndongo didn't go into the transfer portal. Like if he doesn't stay in the draft, he's coming back to Georgia Tech. Miles Kelly could go anywhere.
Yeah, and I think the thing with Miles Kelly is these are, well, I guess they're not untested waters because he tested them last year. But I think what he's looking for is a contract of any kind. Even if he doesn't get drafted and he can still get a contract from a team, I think that's the more desirable situation for him. So it's more of, if I don't get looks in the draft, do I want to stay at Georgia Tech? Do I want to go to a school that can get me more looks? And I'm not sure what you would do in that situation. Like, do you go to a blue blood? Do you go to a team where maybe you get more minutes?
It just depends on
That's
where
kind of the question I've been curious about.
Yeah, that's the thing. Like, if you're going to enter the transfer portal, and again, I'm not trying to overstate, how Georgia Tech is as a program right now, but I feel like you would want to leave for a program where you're going to, like you said, a blue blood. Like, if North Carolina or somebody wanted you, and again, I don't have any intel on this. Like, I don't know what schools would be interested in him. I think it all just depends on what he thinks of the NBA and what the NBA thinks of him. So, again, it's just going to be a waiting game as far as him and Ndongo goes. There's literally nothing you can do at this point. So that's all I really have to say for that, unless you had anything more.
No, just us as fans, we're just kind of playing the guessing game.
It's such a weird thing. Like, he's doing so many things at once. Like, he's going into the portal, but he's declaring for the draft. He could come back to college. He's saying he might return to Georgia Tech. It was so like the 4-star center that decommitted from Kentucky that committed to Georgia the other day. He committed and also declared for the NBA draft.
That's absurd.
It's a weird world we live in right now.
I can't believe there's no kind of regulation for that.
I don't know. That's a topic that might be a little bit beyond my scope of reach or expertise. So I'll just leave it at that. But NFL draft was this past weekend. We didn't really talk much NFL draft. There were some Tech guys in there. So as soon as the draft ended, Luke Benson signed with the Los Angeles Chargers as an undrafted free agent. Dylan Leonard signed with the Denver Broncos. They'll be both in training camp, and they'll be fighting to make the roster. I'll go ahead and say this. I'm not an expert on either the Chargers or the Broncos roster. I will say that neither of them have productive tight end rooms, and they don't have like a young stud there that would prevent them from getting on the roster. Now, again, you have 52 spots there. So generally most teams only carry 2 to 3 tight ends at most. I do think there's an outside shot if they have good camps and preseasons that they could get there. Because like I said, neither of those teams have stud tight ends. So it'll just be, hey, do you have value on special teams? Can you block? Can you stand out in some way? And I'm excited to see those guys do that later this summer. There were a slew of rookie minicamp invites. That was Dante Smith had one today from the New York Giants. Andre White had one from the New York Giants. I think that was a couple of days ago. Paul Muala had one from the Chicago Bears. Jalen King has one to the New York Jets. Just happy for those guys. Now, I don't know how the rookie minicamp invite thing works. I'm guessing you just go there and then they'll decide if they want to bring you onto the roster for training camp. I have to look into that, but any thoughts on this? I was just happy for those guys. I hope they can prove they can have a shot. And I'll say this. There's over the past couple of years, there's been some late round guys or undrafted guys from Tech that have gone on to make impacts. Like Jordan Mason's been a productive player for the 49ers past couple of years. Wanye Thomas literally starts at safety for the Dallas Cowboys. He didn't get drafted. Tyler Davis got a contract with the Green Bay Packers last offseason before getting injured. So, like, Tech's had some guys here that have gone late round or undrafted and found ways to make an impact. And we'll see maybe if that can happen here.
Yeah, I was just kind of shocked that there weren't more like some of the guys that got invited to minicamp. I'm shocked they weren't signed as UDFA's. Um, because heading into the draft, I was very big on Dante Smith, and he's behind Jameer Gibbs at one point, and then you're behind Haynes. So like you're behind two very high NFL talent running backs. I thought he would get a look. But more of I'm just happy for these guys. I think they do have the opportunity to ball out. And there are positions to where even if you're not signed as UDFA, you can make it from rookie minicamp to the roster very easily.
Sure. It's harder.
Yeah.
Like you would rather be in either Benson or Leonard's position of, hey, you're going to be in training camp no matter what. And those guys will still go through rookie mini camp, but it's not like you're going to be there and they have the roster spot for you. So, like I said, we'll kind of keep track of that. I don't know exactly when these mini camp dates are. They're usually around mid-May. Like NFL kind of hits the ground running. They'll have the rookie mini camps in May. Your like team's official mini camp in like mid-June, and then you kind of have like a month and a half off till late July, and then training camp and preseason starts. And then by that point, we're going to be knee deep in Florida State, Georgia Tech stuff, so we won't have as much time to keep an eye on that. But I hope those guys land land somewhere and be productive. But which brings us to our main topic of the afternoon. Like I said, we're not picking over and unders. We're going to do that later this summer because it is still a little early. But I do think it is important to take a look at maybe how Vegas and the odds makers view the ACC race, because I think that can be key in either making predictions or seeing, how does everybody view us. And I think you also have to add some context in there. Like, I know for me, it's like Georgia Tech might have a better roster than SMU. They might have a better team. And people, I think I've seen shocked that SMU has an 8.5 win total. We'll kind of talk about it here in a minute. Go look at their schedule compared to Georgia Tech's. Like, Georgia Tech has to play Georgia for one, and Notre Dame, and Florida State, and Miami. Like, it's a blessing that they don't play Clemson. And as we'll talk about, so I'll just say it right off the top here. So we'll just go ahead and get into Georgia Tech, who opens at 5.5. It's a little higher than last year. Last year, I think it was at 4.5 because I picked the over, and I felt pretty strongly about it last year. They open at 5.5. The team's either equal to Georgia Tech, which Pitt is at 5.5. But the teams that are below them, Wake, which is at 5, Boston College and UVA are at 4.5, and Stanford at 3.5. Georgia Tech doesn't play any of those. And I don't mean that as a slight against those teams like, well, those are easy wins for Georgia Tech, but it's also any of the teams they're projected to be better than, they don't play any of them. So they're playing all the upper tier ACC teams, excluding Clemson and SMU, just based on these win totals. We've talked about the schedule. I'll just kind of go run through it again right here. You obviously open with Florida State in Ireland, Georgia State at home, at Syracuse, VMI, at Louisville, bye week, Duke at home, at North Carolina, Notre Dame in Mercedes-Benz Stadium, at Virginia Tech, bye week, Miami at home, bye week, NC State at home on a Thursday night, and then they go to Athens to finish up the season against Georgia, who is almost certainly going to be number one heading into the season. So it's going to be tough. I would just – this is because I'm most informed on Georgia Tech, I'll say I would lean over right now. They're going to have their work cut out for them, though.
Yeah, you kind of look at the back half of that schedule, and you kind of think, where are we going to get wins, right? Because that's a stretch.
I mean, it's like, where are your layup wins? Because last year I could point to you like 3 or 4 layup wins. I think we've made this point before. There's only like 2 on here I see as just no doubt layups, and that's Georgia State and VMI.
Yeah, and that's it, because your out of conference schedule is always going to be so hard every single year. And in conference is the hardest schedule in forever, because I saw a tweet earlier in CBS Sports preseason top 25. We play 7 top 25 teams this season. So, like, how are you supposed to survive as a program when you barely make a bowl game? Um, I'm getting off topic, but you know, I think to have a successful season to maybe hit the over, you're gonna have to have a lot of wins early and maybe pick up a couple later in the season.
Yeah, and they took the most unconventional path to hitting their over last year. Than if you would have told me before the season Georgia Tech loses to Bowling Green and they hit their over win total, I would have called you flat out insane. Like that's the weird thing to me is they won several games because last year I think I had like 3 games circled as, and not I'm not trying to just to be blunt, like they had no chance of probably beating Georgia. They were probably not going to beat Ole Miss, and they were not going to beat Clemson. That's how I went into last year and viewed it. And then they had several toss up games, and they won most of those toss up games. But they also dropped a couple of layups, and that's the thing is just now I'll say this. I think the schedule does them some favor a little bit early in the season. I don't know if we've talked about this before, but playing Florida State in Ireland in week 0 is probably the best time you want to play them this year. I don't think Florida State is a national title contender, but I probably have as much faith in their coaching staff as almost anybody in the ACCs outside of maybe Clemson. We'll get to Miami in a minute. I think Miami might have the best roster in the ACC. I don't trust that coaching staff as far as anything like that. I just don't trust it. So you're playing a team that this is like a brand new Florida State team. They still have really talented players. Like on paper, their roster is better than Georgia Tech's. I'm not saying it's not, but I think we would both agree that DJU is average, right?
Yeah,
And again,
I think it's a trap game for Florida State.
yes, their fans and a lot of people that cover them will not give this game the time of day. They're not going to, and I think that is a mistake on their part. Like I absolutely think Georgia Tech can win this football game. It's going to be challenging. It's going to be a big uphill battle. They absolutely can win this game. But again, we'll get into that more as the summer goes. But my main point is like if you're going to play them, that's when you want to do it. You don't have to go to Tallahassee. You're playing them. This is the first game a lot of those guys have to play together. Like, and I try not to put a ton into the spring game, but I don't know if you saw DJU was 12 of 26. He kind of had a rough day. So we'll see. Again, it's a spring game. There's probably a ton of external factors there, so I don't want to just be the hot take guy and try to make fun of him. But I have questions about how good he is. They're going to be worse at receiver. I think when you lose Keon Coleman, you lose Johnny Wilson. Like they're talented guys, but I think they get worse there. And then you're replacing guys on the defensive line like Jared Verse and Braden Fisk. So Florida State's going to be an interesting team. I think they'll be much better by the end of the season than they will at the beginning. Would you push back on any of that?
No, I'd agree 100% because kind of get back to Georgia Tech is Florida State. Not that they have an easier schedule, um, but they play some games early to where your team might be in disarray and you might not know, where X players are going to be, where Y players are going to be, and might be in disarray when you play Georgia Tech.
Yeah, it's that there's a lot of layers to that game, but like I said, we'll get into that more as it goes on. I think you're playing Syracuse at the best time. Now it's tricky because it's on the road, and Syracuse is a tough place to play. They beaten Clemson there before when Clemson was like at their peak, making the college football playoff. They've given them tough times. They're just a big question mark because I don't know how good of a coach Fran Brown is. I just don't. Like he could be really good and could like. I thought Dino Babers did a good job there because Syracuse is a really hard place to win. I think I was kind of. I didn't love the way he was kind of run out of town there. But Kyle McCord, the Ohio State transfer, they have a lot of new pieces, and they have some places where they're talented, but it's early in the season with a brand new coach. Like, that's probably when you want to play them. Like, you kind of wished it was at home or something, but I think if you're going to play Syracuse, you prefer to do it early, right?
Yeah, and I guess it's the same thing we talked about with Florida State is some of your harder teams because I see a lot of people saying Syracuse has a shot at the ACC championship. Like
I think
they're a
it's
lot
because
of
of
people's
their
long
schedule
shot.
more than anything.
Yeah,
Like
because
to make it, I don't think they have a chance to win it.
I, yeah, because you're not gonna beat any of the other. You're not gonna beat Clemson, Florida State, Miami. Um, but more with that was, we don't know how proven Kyle McCord is. I'll be blunt with you. Michigan is my, second favorite college team.
Well, it's where you live, man.
I I don't I don't think McCord is that great,
I don't either.
and
He had a team with Marvin Harrison Jr., and there is not a team that has more wide receiver talent than Ohio State. Not Georgia, not Alabama. Texas was sort of on that level last year. He held them back. Like if Ohio State has competent quarterback play last year, they might win the whole dang thing.
yeah, and you have those receivers, and your quarterback play looks mid at best. What happens when you don't have Marvin Harrison Jr. at wide receiver?
So yeah, that I have that question mark too, and I could turn out to be totally wrong. I could be totally wrong. So we'll see. But as you go down the schedule, at Louisville is going to be really tough. Louisville's a hard place to play. Ask Notre Dame. Notre Dame went in there as a big favorite last year, and they got smacked. So we'll see. They have a lot of new transfers. Louisville's a hard team to wrap my head around a little bit because they just have so many new faces everywhere. But Jeff Brom's a really good coach, and I really like the talent they have at receiver. They also lost some guys, though, so we'll see how that happens. I think Duke and North Carolina are very winnable games. Duke, I think, I think Georgia Tech's a better team than Duke, and as we'll see here in a minute, Duke has a higher win total, but again, that's just purely the product of not playing Georgia or some of those harder ACC games like Georgia Tech has to do. We will also talk about I'm not big on North Carolina at all this year, at all. So I think that's a very winnable game, even though it's on the road. And there's going to be all kinds of storylines coming out of that week with the Jeff Collins being there and all that stuff. So that'll be something. Notre Dame, I'll just put it blunt to you right now. I don't think Georgia Tech can win that football game. The rosters, I just think are the talent differential is just too big right now. And again, it feels weird saying Georgia Tech can't win a game because Brent Key has shown he can pull upsets. That's a game I have a very hard time seeing them win right now. I've been wrong before, though, so we'll see. Virginia Tech on the road is really tough. But again, roster-wise, I really don't think Virginia Tech's that much different than Georgia Tech. I just think they're kind of getting steamed a little bit more because of the schedule they play is a little bit easier. Miami is very interesting to me. And, I think you have to separate a little bit. Like last year and everything was what it was. On paper, I think Miami might have the best roster in the ACC. I don't trust their coaching. And if they have some bumps early in the season where they take some losses and stuff, how dialed in are they? By the time they get to November, they could be checked out if they're not in contention for the ACC title or a playoff spot. So I think they're a team to keep an eye on in terms of that. NC State is a team that's also getting steamed a little bit as a possible dark horse for the title. That on a Thursday night at home, that'll be tough. And then obviously Georgia, I have a hard time seeing them winning that game. I don't think they can right now. They kept it close last year. So, again, I'm not the smartest guy in the world. I can be proven wrong, but that's just my take on it for right now. Do you have any other thoughts on the schedule or the win total as it sits right now?
Yeah, I kind of want to put it in I kind of want to put it into perspective that the 5.5 wins is literally strictly only because of how hard the schedule is.
Yeah.
If Georgia Tech has a schedule that's even remotely easier and you play like a Boston College or you play a Cal or a Pitt, you're looking at like a 7.5. Because the way I look at it is I think Georgia Tech is around the 10th spot for the ACC this year, and the win total does not put them there. It's more of you have the hardest schedule in the ACC.
Yep. And now they got to their win total last year, and they dropped 2 games I thought would be layup. Well, I wouldn't say Boston College is a layup, but they were favored in that game by like a touchdown. They lost Boston College and Bowling Green and still hit their win total and made a bowl game. It's just you just have less opportunity for those type of layups because, like I said, there's no world in which they shouldn't beat Georgia State and VMI. But every other game is going to be a scrap. Even
Yeah.
teams I'm not as high on like Duke and North Carolina, like you're not gonna go in there and blow those guys out. It's not gonna happen. I don't think so. It's more of a product of the schedule. I think this roster, like this team, is a good team. You just might not see a huge jump in wins. And I think me and you have both referenced that is there is a chance that this team is on paper is better than last year's team, and they're still just 6-6, 7-5. There's a chance of that.
And I think that's fine. I think the one thing that you have to build on this year, no matter what the record is the defense has to be better,
Yes. Yeah.
regardless of how many wins you have.
If the defense doesn't make pretty decent improvement, there's a chance where they don't make a bowl game.
Yeah, and I think that's a very realistic scenario because you have VMI, you have Georgia State. The next two wins, are mediocre difficulty. Your fifth win is going to be hard, and you have to get to 6.
Yeah.
So
Like
you're
if
going
I
to
had
have to beat top 25 talent teams.
Yeah. So, like, if I had to map it out right now, how they get to 6 wins, okay, Georgia State, VMI, yes. I
Yep.
think we would both agree you probably need to win that Syracuse game.
Yep.
Okay, Duke, North Carolina, that gets you 5. Then it's okay. Your 6th is going to have to be possibly Florida State, Louisville, Notre Dame, Virginia Tech, Miami, NC State, Georgia. You can pick one of those off because, again, I don't trust Miami's coaching staff. They have a good roster. I don't trust their coaching staff. So we'll see how that goes. Virginia Tech is on the road. Louisville is on the road. Florida State, like I said, I think you're getting them in a favorable scheduling spot, but on paper they are a better team than you are. So you're going to have to, play above yourself just a little bit. NC State is at home. That is a well coached team. I think they're getting a little more gassed up than I would prefer. Than I would have them, but we'll talk about them in just a second. And then Georgia's Georgia. Getting to 6 wins is not going to be easy by any stretch.
Yeah, and I don't think going into this season, if you have a 5-7 season, I wouldn't consider that a failure or a big loss because you just play so many talented teams.
As
It's
long as you're
frustrating
not getting
almost.
just like dusted every week.
Yeah.
Like it's one thing if you go 5-7 and you barely scrape by and wins and like you're losing 38-10 to Florida State, 52-7 to Georgia, which again, like Brent Key hasn't got blown out a lot when he's been a big underdog, even against Georgia. Like the only time I remember him getting really blown out was against Florida State right after he took over in 2022. They went down to Tallahassee and they played Jordan Travis and those guys. They got beat up pretty good. Like that was the only time I can really remember them getting blown out. One reason I would have confidence in this going over is he has shown an ability to coach his team up and play above their perceived talent level
Yeah.
in several games. Like they were big underdogs to North Carolina, Miami last year. They won both of those games. They were underdogs to UCF and they won by 2 touchdowns and probably could have been more in the second half. So they've shown an ability to play up to their opponents and really get there. You're gonna have to do it a lot this year, and that's why I would lean over because out of all those games, you could get NC State, you could get Miami, you could Louisville. I think it is a gettable game, but some of these games are on the road too. Like Louisville and Louisville and Virginia Tech are on the road, so it's tough. Would you lean over or under right now? I'm putting you on the spot.
Looking at the schedule, looking at the roster, looking at the defense, which wasn't amazing last year, should be better this year. I I'd like to say I'm gonna lean over. It hurts a little bit because in my brain I'm thinking there's no way we get to 6 wins, but I also think there's a possibility you get to 7-8 if you get hot down the stretch.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna say over, and I think that's the realistic scenario. But I think it could also happen where you have 5. But I don't think you go much under 5.
No, I have a hard time seeing them being like 3-9. I don't think that's going to happen.
Yeah, I don't even think that's possible.
No, I don't either. So it's going to be a bit of a fascinating uh, ride. So, but again, we're going to dig deeper into this, and we welcome everybody's opinion and comments on this. We want to know what y'all think on this as well. So, we won't spend as much time on these. We will later in the summer and the falls. We kind of get to know these rosters a little bit, get to know these teams a little bit better. But just kind of going through, like we said, we wanted to see kind of how Vegas and the odds makers see the ACC race. There's three teams tied with the highest win totals, with Clemson, Miami, and Florida State at 9.5. Now, I want to point out, I think it's Clemson's schedule. They have one of the most interesting schedules in the entire country because it starts off really hard and then it gets pretty easy pretty quick. Obviously, I think everybody knows they start off with Georgia and Mercedes-Benz. That's probably a loss right there, I would imagine. After you play App State in a bye week, you have NC State, Stanford, and Florida State. So they play in three top 25 teams in the first 5 weeks of the season. Depending on how that goes is where they hit their win total to me. Because, again, if you're betting the over and you have them going 10-2, you need them to come out of that stretch, and you probably need them to beat Florida State and NC State because, again, I don't think they're beating Georgia.
Yeah, I think coming out of that stretch, you need to be one loss. Like that's the max you can have.
Yeah, and then again, the rest of their schedules: Wake, Virginia, Louisville, Virginia Tech, Pitt, the Citadel, South Carolina. Like Louisville and Virginia Tech could be tough. Virginia Tech's the only one of those that's on the road. So Clemson has a fairly favorable schedule down the stretch. To me, it all depends on how they come out of that first stretch because, again, they have to go to Tallahassee to play Florida State. Their only home game out of those three is they host NC State because while Clemson's in close proximity to Atlanta, it's probably going to be like a 65-35 split between them and Georgia, I would imagine, for that opening weekend game. Depending on how they fare there, that might be your answer. Because if they go in there and get blown out, it could be a rough season for Clemson. And I'll also say, if Clemson would just do a little bit of work in the transfer portal, I would feel very confident in picking them to win this conference.
100%.
They have a great starting 22. If they would just shore up a couple spots, even just with some depth, I don't even say they're needing a lot of starters through the portal, but I just don't. And also, I don't know how good Cade Klubnik is either, but I just think they're mismanaging that a lot. But I want to talk about Miami's schedule for a minute here because out of these three, I think they undoubtedly have maybe the easiest one. They go to Florida week one, then they have Florida A&M, Ball State, USF, Virginia Tech, at Cal, bye week, at Louisville, Florida State, Duke, at Georgia Tech, bye week, Wake Forest, and Syracuse. Like, I'll say this: if they lose that game to Florida, there's going to be unmitigated panic at Miami because Florida's not supposed to be any good this year, and this is supposed to be, getting Cam Ward and everything. This is supposed to be kind of the year Miami takes a little bit of a leap. If they don't, that's not going to be great vibes down there.
Yeah, and then you kind of get into the question, what is the rest of the year going to look like? Because if you lose that early, and that's a huge rivalry, how is your morale is going to be bad?
Because there's already a lot of people that question how good of a coach Mario Cristobal is and can he get the most out of this roster. There's sometimes I think that gets a little overblown because I do think people forget he did have a couple double-digit win seasons and he's won 2 Pac-12 titles at Oregon. I don't think he's a trash coach. I think people I'm not going to get into that right now, but I think he's a little bit of a better coach than some people will have you believe. But also, I don't think there's any doubt he does underachieve quite a bit with the amount of talent on his roster. I think that's fair to point out. So I think a lot of it hinges on that game. I don't even think they have to blow out Florida, but if you take care of business there, I know a lot of people think South Florida could get that Group of 5 playoff spot. We'll see. I don't know. I don't know a lot about their roster, to be honest, but I have seen some projections that have them there. But you couldn't have drawn up a more favorable ACC schedule. You don't have to play Clemson. You don't have to play some of these other top 2 teams. You don't have to play NC State. They need to take advantage of this schedule because it's only going to get harder for them throughout.
Yeah, and the thing is they're not going to have a fully constructed, a well thought out team like this for a while. Like this is to me the best Miami team in a few years.
In a while, I'd say.
Yeah.
Like that, yeah, it's been a while because they haven't. You know, they had that one year in 2017 where they got to the ACC title game, but you know, it's 7 wins is kind of where they've been. Like they need to cash in on this. You had a back to back. You had a top 10 recruiting class. You had a top 5 last year, I believe. I think they finished like 4th or 5th last year. Like, they brought in a lot of talent. Like, it's time to cash in on that if you're Miami. Or there's going to be some questions need to be asked. But just last team here, Florida State. I actually think Florida State's schedule's fairly reasonable. Like, you do have the Ireland game versus Tech. They play on Labor Day night against Boston College. That'll be Bill O'Brien's first game at Boston College, so enjoy that. They have a bye week. Memphis is another team I've seen get a lot of group of 5 love as a possible playoff spot. We'll see how good they really are. Cal, SMU, they get Clemson at home, then another bye week at Duke, at Miami, North Carolina. They do go to Florida State first off, but I think in like the month of November, they play FSU, Ole Miss, Texas, and LSU. So like there's November, their whole schedule is just insane. But that stretch near the end, like Florida, is just going to be limping to the finish line, I think. So I think it's a lot more favorable than opening the season with them.
Yeah, and you think about Florida, and they were they were a powerhouse for a very, very long time. And it's kind of hard to reason now that, you know, maybe they're kind of falling out of that limelight. Um, but I think Florida really at any point in the season, because beginning of the season, end of the season, to me, I think it's all the same because I think it's really going to be the same team.
I at least think because they're only like a 4-point dog to Miami, and I know they're at home.
Really?
So that would suggest that odds makers think Miami's a pretty good bit better than them if they're nearly favored by 4 or 5 points on Florida's home field. So like on a neutral field, because Florida has a good home field advantage. So Miami's probably favored by like a touchdown or more neutral field, I would think. You could talk yourself, if you win that game, you could get to 6 wins maybe. But if whoever loses that game is going to be like the worst vibes of the week by far. Because both of them need to win it for different reasons.
Yeah, well, because Florida just wants to.
They just need to make a bowl game. Miami wants to be a playoff contender and win the ACC. And when I say playoff contender, it's 12 teams now. So it's not as far-fetched as, 4 teams. So just keep that in mind as well. So, okay, just a quick question. Out of these 3 right here, who would you feel most confident betting the over in? For me,
That's tough because I'm not confident in FSU at all. It's between Clemson and Miami, but I'd probably lean Clemson. Just because I don't. If Miami loses early, I think they kind of spiral. And Clemson's the only, like, in my eyes, proven team.
Yes. Here's how I think about it is like, I think Dabo is still a more accomplished coach than Norvell, but I feel like I'm at least getting a really good offense, even around DJU with Norvell. I don't know how good Klubnik is, and again, I think they have a better defense. Clemson might have one of the 5 best defenses in the country. But also that early schedule, like if they really get it taken to them by Georgia, like how does their morale look after that first week? Like it could be fine. Like Oregon got the crap beat out of them a couple of years ago, and they wound up going 10-2. So like it's possible you come out of it live, but I think that's a really interesting question because there's big questions around these 3, which I think opens the door for somebody you're not thinking of to get into that ACC title game and who knows, maybe win it.
Yeah, and I think you have a decent amount of teams
Yeah.
in every area of win total. So, like, 8.5, I think NC State can do it. I think
Tech can do it. Let's get right to it. There are 3 teams right below Clemson, Miami, and Florida State. We'll just kind of go through this quickly since we spent a while talking about some of these other teams like NC State, Louisville, SMU. I remember I hopped on a podcast last year and I told people I don't think Louisville is one of the 2 best teams in the ACC. I thought they could make the ACC title game because of their schedule, because they didn't have to play Clemson. They didn't have to play Florida State. They didn't have to play some of those other teams. Their non-conference schedule was an absolute cakewalk outside of Notre Dame. SMU, I kind of see around those lines a little bit, maybe not quite as much, but their schedule is just really favorable, as is Louisville's. by the way, because like Louisville plays Austin P and Jacksonville State before they play Georgia Tech. So they'll be undefeated by the time they play Georgia Tech. Then they get Notre Dame, SMU, Virginia, Miami, Boston College, at Clemson, at Stanford, Pitt, and at Kentucky. SMU, this is their first year in the ACC. They start at Nevada. Then they play somebody, HCU Huskies. I'm not exactly sure who that is, but probably a win. BYU, which could be a tough game. Then they play TCU after a bye week. Their first ACC game is against Florida State at home. They go to Louisville. Here's the rest of their ACC schedule after they play Florida State, Louisville: Stanford, Duke, Pitt, Boston College, Virginia, and Cal. Like,
See, they
you
got
cannot
the
cross that
opposite
up.
Georgia Tech schedule.
Like, yeah, that's what I'm saying. I don't think Georgia Tech and SMU are that much different team wise and roster wise. Like, I don't think SMU is a far better team. Like, you look at the win total, SMU's at 8.5 and Georgia Tech's 5.5. Okay, SMU doesn't have to play Notre Dame. SMU doesn't have to play Georgia. SMU doesn't have to play Miami. SMU doesn't have to play NC State. Like, they get a lot of these. I don't even think they have to play Virginia Tech. Yeah, they don't. Like, they play Florida State and Louisville, and then they might end the season with 6 straight wins.
Yeah, I don't think it's unreasonable to say.
They could absolutely be in the ACC title if that's where you're going with it.
Yeah, and they could end it 10 wins, which is absurd.
I think I would probably lean over on SMU, and I know a lot of people have been like, I think people think they're getting overhyped. It's just the schedule, man. I'm just that's the reason for a lot of these, because I see so many people wondering with wide eyes, how is SMU at 8.5 as their first year in a power conference? They've done pretty well at the AAC level, and their schedule is just not hard. Now, there is a chance that they'll leap up in competition week to week, because like there are a couple teams in the AAC I think that are better than some of these lower tier teams, but you're not playing Tulsa. You're not playing some of those really lower tier AAC teams that are really bad. You're not playing any of those. No disrespect to Tulsa fans, sorry. But, Virginia is better than the worst AAC team. Like, Duke is a lot better than the worst AAC team. So, like, you're going to have to see it week to week. And I do think that's where there is caution. But if you split the Florida State-Louisville game and then win out, you're in the ACC championship game. That's how I would look at this season if I were them, is I would try to split those 2 games and then win out the rest of the way.
Yeah, and you don't even, if you're SMU, you don't even have to destroy teams. Like, if you go through and you beat Duke by a touchdown, you beat a ton of other teams by a touchdown, like,
they're not going to go through here and just waltz over everybody. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying if you go in there and win those last 6 games and you split the Florida State-Louisville game, SMU's in the ACC championship game, and with a win could get in the playoff.
Okay, getting there. If they make it to the ACC championship game, I think they get demolished, for being realistic.
Possibly. Again, I'll have to see how they play against Florida State and Louisville, because like we said, it's not like you're getting there and you're playing like Georgia or Ohio State, teams I know were elite and teams I know were good. We just said we have a lot of questions about Clemson, Miami, and Florida State. So I don't think it's totally out of the question.
I'm not saying it's unrealistic. I'm saying it might take a lot. It wouldn't take a miracle. It would take a lot.
Yeah, it would. I'm not saying it would. I just think that if I'm betting a long shot to win a conference title, I'm doing it in the Big 12 or the ACC, just because of some of the easier schedules. And if you get there, who are you facing? Because who knows? Maybe you're facing a team that took advantage of an easy schedule as well. Like, it's super, super unlikely. But what if you got there and faced Virginia Tech?
Or what if you got there and you faced Syracuse?
I'm not going there. That's I guess we should probably talk about NC State real quick. Let me get their schedule pulled up. But again, it's not as easy as I think Louisville's and SMU.
Yeah.
But it's still pretty favorable, because again, you get Clemson pretty early. Like, you have to go there. I think one of the most interesting non-conference games of the year is NC State, Tennessee, neutral site in Charlotte. Those are both fringe 12-team playoff contenders, and I think you could come out of that knowing how good one of them is. Because if NC State goes in there and wins, who knows? Like we'll see. But they get two. They're kind of like Clemson a little bit, and they have a front loaded schedule. You have Tennessee neutral site, and then you go to Clemson. But the rest of their schedule is Western Carolina, Louisiana Tech, Northern Illinois, Wake Forest, Syracuse, at Cal, bye week, Stanford, Duke, bye week, Georgia Tech, North Carolina. So it's pretty easy. But again, if you're betting, the thing is, you could have them lose to Tennessee and Clemson early in the year, and you could get over and get to 9 wins. Like they don't even have to split those games.
Yeah, and like their out of conference is so easy. I don't know.
Reading some of these schedules and then seeing what like Georgia Tech has played, and they will welcome any challenge. Like they will tell you they will welcome any challenge any week. But it's just like, man, could you just imagine if you swap schedules with SMU?
Yeah, and like all of these 8.5 teams, I don't look at these as like elite teams.
No,
it's
I don't.
just the schedule.
Yeah, that's the thing, and people need to understand that when you see these win totals, a lot of it is just based on it's not roster necessarily. Because I know a lot of people, and I know clowning on Miami is fun and all, but it's people will see their 9.5 win total and say, well, Miami always underachieves this, that. Mario Cristobal sucks. Go look at their schedule. Like, go look at the schedule. That's why it's at 9.5 for a reason. Vegas is usually smarter than all of us. Like, there's a reason these win totals are where they're at because Georgia Tech was at 4.5. They went over it, but they got to 6. And they could have got more if they hadn't dropped the Bowling Green and Boston College games, but that's a talk for another day.
If you do that, though, do you win against Miami?
Yeah.
Like if you give those games,
but because losing to Bowling Green
never
had nothing.
Again.
Probably not. But like losing to Bowling Green, or are you talking about if they hadn't lost to Bowling Green, would they have beaten Miami? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
I still think so because it wasn't like I'm getting a little off topic here, but it wasn't like Georgia Tech just played tremendously in that game. Like they benefited a lot from Mario Cristobal being a blockhead. Like that's
what I'm saying.
And I'm not trying to take away anything, but it's like he's still a blockhead whether you lose to Bowling Green or not.
Yeah.
So, all right, out of these 3 teams, I would probably bet the over maybe all of them. And if somebody has to lose games in the ACC, but they're playing all the teams that are probably going to lose games.
Yeah, the only team I might go under on is Louisville.
Yeah, their schedule's tougher than the other 2.
Yeah, but I think they're the most legit team out of the 3.
Who, Louisville?
Yeah.
But you would bet the under just because the schedule's a little tougher.
Yeah, that's the only reason.
Because I think they play both Miami and Clemson. Because no team has to play all 3 of Miami, Clemson, Florida State. If I'm pretty sure when I went through reading these, I don't think any team plays all 3 of them because I know Georgia Tech plays Miami and Florida State, but they don't play Clemson. So,
yeah, I think you're
right. All right. Well, let's drop down a little bit. There's just grouping these 3 teams together. North Carolina, Virginia Tech at 7.5. 7.5. Syracuse at 7. I'll just go ahead and just get this off my chest. North Carolina, to me, is by far the team I'm the least confident in. I think Drake May covered up a lot for this team. I know there was a lot of Drake May nitpicking at the draft last week in terms of how good he is. I think he is absolutely really good in the real deal. If they don't have him, I don't know if they go to a bowl game. I just don't think the rest of their defense stinks still. I think they're going to be a very run-heavy team with Amari and Hampton. He is a really, really good player. He's probably going to be a first-team All-ACC running back. You lose Tez Walker at receiver. You lose Drake May. They don't really have difference makers on the defensive side of the ball, in my opinion. There's a massive question at quarterback. I think this team could go slide back to under 6 wins.
Yeah, I think we're kind of looking at the opposite situation that we were at 8.5.
Mm-hmm.
Because I could see 6. I could maybe even see 5 wins out of UNC.
Yep.
Because I think they're kind of in the situation that Miami was in last year, where you have a decent amount of preseason expectations. You have, a decent amount of, people that I would consider game changers on offense. But you don't really have much else.
Now, it should be said that their schedule is not I think the 7.5 is mostly because of their schedule, and I mean that in a good way for them because their schedule is not overly tough. Minnesota, Charlotte, NC Central, James Madison. You're probably looking at a 4-0 start. They could go to Minnesota and lose though. Like that's not an easy win for them.
I think Minnesota's a tough team.
Yeah, and it's on the road too. Is the other thing. Then you have at Duke, Pitt, Georgia Tech, bye week, Virginia. Then they do play Florida State. You're probably looking at a loss there, but then they have a bye week and then Wake Forest, Boston College, NC State. So maybe I'm being a little over dramatic by saying they only win 5 games. But they lost to Virginia last year. They lost to some lower quality teams and were in some dogfights they probably shouldn't have been. Even with Drake May, like a top 5 pick at quarterback, a top 3 pick at quarterback. So if there's a massive drop off at quarterback and then the defense doesn't get any better, I think it's a struggle. I wouldn't touch the 7.5. I think from a team perspective, I would lean under, but it's just their schedule's it's light enough to where I could see them being a really bad 8-4 team.
But the thing is I could also see him dropping. Like I can see you lose to James Madison.
They could lose to Duke.
Yeah.
I'll say this about James Madison. They lost a lot from that team last year, I think. So I don't know if they're going to be as good as they were last year, but they could lose to Minnesota. They could lose to Duke. I don't think Pitt's that good, but I do like Pat Narduzzi's a good coach. Like he gets the most out of his guys. Like I don't think that's an easy win for them. I don't think Georgia Tech is by any stretch an easy win. I have no idea what Wake and BC look like, so we'll see there. But I don't know. I wouldn't touch that number at anything. I would just leave that alone. Virginia Tech, I think, is an interesting team because I've seen them. They're getting a lot of preseason love, and I don't think it's like not warranted. Like they're bringing back maybe the most returning production in the country. And look, they start the season at Vanderbilt, then they play Marshall, at Old Dominion, and Rutgers. So that's a pretty soft non-conference. Then they go to Miami on a Friday night. Then they go to Stanford. Then they have a bye week. And then it's Boston College, Georgia Tech, Syracuse, Clemson, bye week, Duke, Virginia. Like they don't play Florida State. They don't play NC State. They don't play Louisville. They don't play SMU. They don't play those teams like kind of above them. They get Clemson and Miami. You could see a scenario, depending on how they do the other games, where they could lose to both Clemson and Miami and possibly still make the ACC title. It's not likely. You probably might want to split one of those games because I don't know if I trust Virginia Tech enough to where I can just give them automatic wins over everybody. But I would probably lean over for Virginia Tech right there.
Yeah, and I think I would too because there's not a ton of games where it's you go into it and you think, oh, guaranteed loss, or oh, this team is, like they're gonna be underdogs by a touchdown. Probably Clemson. I don't even know if they'll be considered underdogs by a touchdown when they play Miami. Like that might be
I think because it's on the road. Because I think I know a lot of people like Miami fans don't show up for a lot of games. I think they'll show up for that game because some people forget this is kind of a long rivalry they've had since the old Big East days. Like that, I think Miami will have a good crowd there for Virginia Tech. I think, but there's a chance like you have 10,000 people in the stands too on a Friday night in Miami. So we'll see. But it's also, I don't know. It's early enough in the season where I don't think the bottom is going to completely fall out of Miami, even if they lose to Florida, because they should win the next 3 games. And you can still talk yourself into, hey, we need to win these ACC games and get to the ACC title game so we can have a chance to get to the playoff. Like, I don't think by the end of September, I don't think the bottom will be out for Miami, even if they lost to Florida.
Yeah, and I think to go with that is I think Virginia Tech also is going to be in the same boat where, if they play good through September, you could be looking at, ACC championship.
Possibly. The thing that's given me a little bit of pause is they did really well when they played teams as talented or less talented than they were. Whenever they had to play up in competition, they were kind of like the reverse Georgia Tech a little bit. Whenever they had to play up in competition, they got their butt kicked a lot. Like NC State blew them out. that Florida State blew them out. Like whenever they had to play up in competition, even just a little bit, they did not fare too well. So I think that's one thing just to keep in mind. And look, Syracuse opened with Ohio. They play Georgia Tech at home. They get a week 3 bye week, but then Stanford, Holy Cross, UNLV. They do go to NC State, probably a loss, bye week, and then it's Pitt, Virginia Tech, Boston College, Cal, UConn, and then Miami. So they get one of the Miami, Florida State, Clemson trio, and it's at the end of the season. And and it's at home too. So pretty favorable drop for Syracuse. I have no idea what they're going to look like.
Yeah, I have. Thing is I have absolutely no faith in McCord, like literally next to zero. But and I heard this talk on CBS Sports. Like this schedule is, I don't want to say easy. You don't play a lot of hard teams. Like you play NC State, you play Miami.
There are 2 games in which I would pick them to lose right now. That's Miami, NC State, where I would feel good about picking against them.
Yeah, the only other one that you could lump into that category if you want is Virginia Tech.
Yeah, but again, like they only have like win total wise, they're almost the same. So like I don't think anybody thinks Virginia Tech's that much better than Syracuse.
Yeah, and like my thing is, if you look at 7, who are they going to lose to? Like to me, this is an obvious over. Like you have Ohio, I think that's a win. Stanford, Holy Cross, UNLV, I think you come out of there. Thing is, I don't know if you beat Georgia Tech. If you do,
to me, that's a toss-up game.
Yeah, because they're very.
It's at home, and I don't know how good Georgia Tech's defense is going to be.
Yeah.
So I think Georgia Tech's a better team than Syracuse, but there are reasons why Syracuse can win that game.
But it's also it's early in the year, so if Georgia Tech is if they're coming off a win in Dublin, I think that's a win for Georgia Tech.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. Syracuse is the one team where we talked about this offseason. I am not big on Syracuse at all, and I don't think, they're a higher tier team. But I would go the over because Ohio, Stanford, Holy Cross, UNLV, and then Pitt, Boston College, UConn, Cal. Like that's 9 teams I just named, and the win total's 7.
Yep.
They can drop every other game and beat their way.
They could lose to Miami and NC State and go over this.
Yeah, so. They can lose to Virginia Tech and be fine.
Yeah, you could lose Miami, NC State, Georgia Tech, Virginia Tech, and you hit your over with 8 wins.
Yeah, and the best team you beat is Pitt, I guess.
Yeah, it's just crazy how some of these schedules just vary.
Maybe Vegas knows more than I do. Maybe Holy Cross, maybe the Crusaders are
no.
that good.
It's at 7.
I feel like I'm missing something.
I'm just telling you, it's at 7 because of this schedule. I don't think roster-wise anybody thinks super highly of Syracuse. It's just like you're going to be favored all right, they'll be favored against Ohio. I can't decide if they're going to be favored against Georgia Tech or not. Like I think because it's at home, I want to lean maybe like a field goal favorite, but I don't know. But even
I kind of want to think even.
Yeah.
Well, if Georgia Tech beats. If we win in Dublin,
the teams are somewhat even. I think you'd have to give a slight edge to Syracuse because it's at home.
Yeah.
They'll be favored against Stanford. They're favored against Holy Cross. Favored against UNLV. They'll be underdogs at NC State. I actually think they might be a slight underdog at Pitt because it's on the road. They'll probably be a home dog to Virginia Tech. They'll probably be favored at Boston College. At Cal, I will make the argument. I think Cal is an underrated team, and I stutter saying that a little bit, but I actually think they have some offensive talent that people are overlooking a little bit. UConn, they'll absolutely be favored at, and that they'll be underdog in Miami. So there's 6 no doubt games they'll be favored in, and then there's a couple of toss-ups like Pitt, Georgia Tech are toss-ups. So they'll be an interesting team to watch this year. All right.
If I'm a betting man, I take the over.
Yep.
Just saying.
All right. Let's get through these last few teams. Cal and Duke, I think, are Cal is an interesting because, like I said, I do think they will be better than people think. I think Duke is a big mystery to me because Manny Diaz was just okay in his first time around as a head coach at Miami. Now we've seen guys go from being decent head coaches, getting a new shot, being good head coaches. Like he could. I thought he deserved a second chance. He's an excellent defensive coordinator, but you're losing Riley Leonard, who's a very good quarterback, and you're losing Dwayne Carter on the defensive line. Like they're losing talent as well as their running back. I think a lot of it hinges on Diaz, and they take Texas transfer Malik Murphy. He's a very talented player. How quick can he hit his ceiling? I would probably lean under on Duke right now, but they're kind of a team I just can't get a good read on because their schedule's not super, super tough, but they're not going to be favored in a ton of games.
Yeah, Duke is, for me, out of any team in the ACC, Duke is like the mystery team.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure I don't think Duke can go out and get 9 wins. I'm just gonna say that right now.
No, I
I
don't.
think they're generally gonna stay around the win total. I'm just not sure how the team is gonna look. Like, are they gonna be a sneaky 6-win team? Are they gonna be a really good 7-win team? Are they gonna be a bad 6-win team? Like, I just have literally no clue how they're gonna look.
Yeah, and here's the thing. Because I see that especially like pop up around like when people talk about NFL win totals. So, well, this team they had a really good draft, had really good free agency. Why is their win total so low? Somebody's got to lose games. Not every team can hit their win total. So somebody has to lose games. This is where you might just bucket Cal and Duke into. They're not terrible teams. Somebody's got to lose games in the conference. Like, again, Duke's schedule, they need a fast start. They play Elon, Northwestern, UConn, and Middle Tennessee State. You need to win all 4 of those if you want to have a chance for this to go over and hit 7. Because then it's North Carolina at home, at Georgia Tech, bye week, at Florida State. This is a brutal 5-game stretch. Florida State at home, SMU at home, at Miami, at NC State, Virginia Tech at home. Like, that's tough. And then you finish off the season against Wake.
So I got a question for you. How many games in the schedule do you think are not guaranteed wins, but like where you expect them
Would
to
Duke
be?
be favored?
No, not even favored. Like, you look at this game, and they're like,
They could win it.
I don't know how to explain it. Like, no doubt, Duke's winning this game.
The first 4.
Uh,
The 3 of the first 4. I don't know that at Northwestern's a guarantee because Ryan Braun, he did a really good job last year. I thought after the Pat Fitzgerald fiasco at the start of last year, I thought they were about to be I thought there was a chance they went 0-12, especially after they lost to Rutgers week 1. They wound up making a bowl game. So, like, didn't they win their bowl game too? They beat Utah, right?
no, yeah.
So that's not a guaranteed win, but for this to go over and hit 7, you've got to win those first 4. I think you probably might even need to start 6-0. You might need to beat North Carolina and Georgia Tech and then beat Wake Forest because, truthfully, I don't know that they're winning that 5-game stretch. I don't know that they win any games right there. They might beat SMU, but
Yeah, I think the best realistic scenario is you take the top 4, you take 1 out of North Carolina and Georgia Tech, and
I think getting to a bowl game would be a great job for Manny Diaz this year.
yeah, like I do not think 6 wins would be a disappointment,
No.
regardless of it being.
I know they've overachieved with Mike Elko these past couple of years, but it's Duke. Like, come on. And I don't mean that as a disrespectful way. Like, this just isn't a team or a program that always contends in the ACC. Like, I still think getting to a bowl game is a good accomplishment to do. Well, let's just, again, we're going to go through these pretty quickly. Pitt, Wake. Wake's kind of a big mystery to me because over the years, like, I think you could expect Dave Clawson to get the most out of his roster. Like, the years they had Sam Hartman, A.T. Perry, they had really good offenses. That went away in a big way last year. Like, their offense stunk bad last year. I just don't know what they're going to look like this year. They're a mystery team. Again, you could almost copy and paste those comments to Pat Narduzzi and Pitt. He usually gets the most out of this roster, but you've seen some really good defensive players transfer out. Their quarterback situation scares me. outside of the Kenny Pickett year where they won the ACC, which seems like 20 years ago at this point because of how much they've struggled the past couple of seasons on offense. I don't really trust them to be a good offensive team, so I would stay away from these two if I'm looking at win totals, because I could see a world where they hit 6-6 and overachieve just a little bit, but I don't know that it's going to be that much more than that. There's also like a floor of like 3-9, 4-8. I could see them also getting to.
Yeah, and like my thing for Pitt at 5.5 is what is the QB situation going to look like?
I
Like
don't know.
that's my biggest worry. And
These two might have the worst quarterback situation in the ACC.
100, it's not even close.
Even
Because at
Boston
least
College and
Stanford,
Virginia have, and even Stanford, I think they have a better quarterback situation.
yeah, these are two teams I wouldn't touch with a 10-foot pole, either over or under. Um, I think out of the two, though, I think Pitt has a better chance to break out.
Yeah, they
But
can. Well, I think you'll get a good read on them early in the year. They go to Cincinnati and then they play West Virginia at home. Those are two not easy non-conference games. If you win both of them, they could get 6 wins, sure. If you don't, good luck. Moving on to Boston College and Virginia. I swear we're almost at the bottom here. I know it's been a little bit of a long podcast, but appreciate anybody tuning in with us here. Man, I was never a big fan of the Tony Elliott hire. I think he's a great guy. The results just haven't been there. Again, if Anthony Calandria was kind of exciting as a freshman quarterback last year, but you lose Malik Washington, who I was surprised fell to like the 6th round of the draft last week. He was the ACC's leading receiver last year. A little bit on the smaller side, but he's a really good player. I don't really have a lot of faith in them. And then I like Thomas Castellanos at Boston College. I think he's a good dual threat quarterback. One, I don't know how they'll look under Bill O'Brien, and two, they got to 6-6 with one of the easiest schedules in the ACC last year. Like, if it gets a little tougher and whatnot, I just don't know how you can bet the over here.
yeah, and well, for Boston College, what I want to say is I'm not a big fan of anything that has happened in the offseason, right? Like I don't Boston College.
Yeah.
Yeah, like I don't think the O'Brien hire is smart. You have probably the weakest class in the ACC in my opinion.
Didn't do much in the portal.
Yeah. So I don't know, Boston College. Well, let me say this. I think most people think Stanford is your quote unquote worst team in the ACC. I think
It could be Boston College.
Yeah.
3 of their first 4 games at Florida State, at Missouri, Michigan State.
I just how was their win total 4.5?
Duquesne's a win.
Yeah.
They can beat Western Kentucky. They can go to Virginia and win. That's a winnable game for them. That's 3. You're probably not beating Virginia Tech, probably not beating Louisville. Could they beat Syracuse?
I don't think so.
Could they? They're probably not going to SMU and winning.
I think
North Carolina and Pitt. Yeah, like I'm thinking 3 right here. Like, I don't know, maybe Pitt bottoms out and is just really bad. And if North Carolina, like, I'm not high on them, but I agree with you. But we could be looking at Boston College being the worst team in the ACC this year.
Yeah, and I've seen some crazy ACC head coach rankings. Like, Bill O'Brien is, I wouldn't say consensus, but some people are putting him, above the bottom 5 coaches and are saying he's one of the best hires of this offseason. I don't think that's remotely.
I'll say this about it. One, he has accomplished a pretty good bit. He did win some division titles in the NFL. I know what you're saying. I think it's who are you attracting there for that job that could list his accomplishments? I guess is like I'm playing devil's advocate here, but Boston College is not like the most desirable job. So I think it's just, and I don't know if you have to worry about him being hired away either. Like he's never going to be an NFL head coach again. He's not going to, I think, be a major college coach unless he just does some sort of, what are your goals at Boston College? It's probably just to get to a bowl game, right?
Yeah, I
on a
mean,
yearly basis.
best case scenario.
Yeah, like he could get him to that. So I'll defend it a little bit. I don't love it, but I kind of see where they're coming from a little bit with it.
I'm gonna put something crazy out there. If Tech beats Florida State in Dublin, I don't think it's crazy to say that Boston College can win the next week.
Beat Florida State.
Beat Florida State.
No,
I don't think that's crazy.
no,
I'm
no.
putting it out there. If this happens, we're gonna book
Here's
it.
the thing. I know Georgia Tech only has a one win higher than Boston College on the win total. Georgia Tech is a much better football team on paper than Boston College.
And I do
But
agree with that, but
who are the playmakers that Florida State needs to be scared of on Boston College outside of Castellanos? I can name you about 5 on Georgia Tech: Singleton, Jamal Haynes, Malik Rutherford. Like I can go there. They have one of the best offensive lines in the conference. They just led the ACC in rushing against one of the toughest schedules. Like Boston College barely etched out to a bowl game against an easy schedule and did like next to nothing to improve their team this year.
I don't know.
I
I
would be
just think
stunned if they beat Florida State.
okay. I'm just gonna say with pass heavy offense, like O'Brien says he wants to bring.
Does
I'm
that
just
play to
saying it's
your
possible.
quarterback
I'm
strength?
not saying it's gonna happen. I'm saying it's very possible.
Well, could you imagine Florida State starting 0-2?
I I'm dreaming about it.
But does a pass heavy offense fit your quarterback? Probably
I
not, right?
mean, no, but
That
it,
that would scare me.
the only thing is like you don't. Florida State doesn't match up amazing with Boston College if it's a pass heavy team.
Some FSU fans gonna find this and clip it. I'm just telling you that right now.
Hey,
So some
I'm letting
fans
you
will
know.
find this and come get you.
Well, I guess it's week 1 because we play in week 0. Week 1, I'm booking it. Boston College. Oh, I should. Nah,
Yeah, don't do
they're
it.
gonna cover the spread. They're gonna cover the spread.
What's the spread?
I mean, it's probably gonna be like 10.
10. It's gonna be like 24.
There's no way.
I bet
If
you
they
Florida
lose,
State is at least a 3 touchdown favorite over Boston College.
see to me that's crazy.
I don't
I don't
think
think it's
so.
gonna
I
happen.
think they boat race them. But let's finish up with Stanford. Let's get to Stanford and finish this thing out. Look, I like Troy Taylor as a head coach. He did a great job at Sacramento State. I think he overachieved a little bit last year. This is just not a good roster. I think everybody knew when he took this job, and David Shaw kind of was starting. Stanford's a program that's just it's hard to win in the transfer portal era and with NIL because they just don't seem to be all that into it. And Stanford's a really hard school to get into. I think it's a really, really challenging place to win right now. It's arguably one of the hardest Power Five jobs. Whenever I talk about Stanford, I think people should know that. Like there are a lot of challenges to it, and it's starting off the season Friday night against TCU. I don't know how well it's going to go. You got to beat Cal Poly. They go to Syracuse, at Clemson, Virginia Tech, at Notre Dame, SMU, Wake Forest, at NC State, Louisville, Cal, and San Jose. I think there is a chance Stanford is the worst team in the ACC. I will also say this: I don't think it's crazy to bet they're over on the win total and see them going 4-8 because Cal Poly should be a win. I think Syracuse can be a win. I hate that it's across the country and it's a road game, but I think it's at least in terms of on paper talent, it's winnable. Wake Forest is a winnable game. It's also a home game. Cal is a winnable game, and San Jose State is a winnable game. That's what you're probably looking at there. They haven't really shown a propensity to pull upsets under Troy Taylor yet, and they still have a lot of question marks. But I would feel more comfortable betting their over than either Boston College or Virginia's.
Yeah, and my thing is with Stanford is they kind of had out of the lower teams, they kind of had one of the strongest off seasons. Like you get Elijah Brown, who I think is a great recruit. Uh, get the kid from Washington, cornerback. I'm forgetting his name. Um, but to me, like they don't have the hardest schedule, but you can go through. Like you can beat Cal Poly,
Mm-hmm.
you can beat Wake. I mean, there's a few winnable games in the schedule. So yeah, I wouldn't be shocked if they get 4, maybe 5.
Bowl game's
I
probably not happening.
No. I think
I,
the longer this podcast goes on, I make even more outrageous takes.
yeah, I think longer podcasts is just where you start to go a little crazy. I don't think you're built for this game quite yet. I think we got to get you adjusted a little bit, but
Yeah,
I
I'm
know
gonna
this
have
was a
to.
little bit longer of a discussion than we normally have, but I thought it was at least good. We've been talking about doing a discussion on win totals for a while. I wanted to kind of wait till the transfer portal got settled because I think it was mostly an uneventful portal cycle. Like, I don't think a ton of I think it was severely overhyped. Like, I saw a lot of people talking about it was going to be crazy. All the kids are going to be jumping in this. You're not going to expect getting in this. And like, um, nobody's there. I just saw some. You want to hear some interesting breaking news?
Go ahead.
Old friend Jeff Sims is heading to Arizona State.
No way.
Yeah, I saw that had been kind of a rumor the past couple of weeks, but I hope he does well there. I wish him all the best. Hope he succeeds there. But yeah, we just kind of wanted to get a lay of the land of the ACC, kind of how Vegas thinks of it, and just kind of breaking down the schedules. And as you can see, there are some teams that could get to the ACC title game that you might not think are ACC championship caliber, but could take advantage of a schedule. I think that is, if there's any conference that could happen, it's the ACC. Big 12 as well, but I don't think you have a national title contender in the Big 12. I think you at least could have a few in the ACC. I think that I don't want to get off on that rabbit trail, but so I just think it's interesting to look at how people view the ACC race coming into the year, how the schedules match up, and we're going to dive in deeper into this as the summer goes along because we're about to get into the dog days of summer. We got about 3 months left till game time, so we'll be talking a lot about Florida State, that matchup, and all sorts of things. But before we wrap up, always as we always ask, if you're watching this on YouTube, please like the video. It helps us out a lot. Subscribe to the channel. That helps us out a ton. Leave comments below. Let us know what you guys think of the show. Leave your opinions as well. We want to hear feedback from everybody. We love getting it and everything. Let us know how we're doing. If we need to do things better, if you like what we're doing, please let us know. We love making this kind of content for the Georgia Tech community, and we enjoy all the feedback we get. So just be sure to do that. If you're following along, listening on podcast form, leave us a review there, whatever kind of rating you think we can get. That always helps us out a ton. Leave your questions, comments, concerns. Like, I know this is a little bit longer one than we usually do, but I thought I wanted to go a little bit in depth in terms of these win totals and stuff and kind of get a lay of the land. So we'll definitely be revisiting this topic. But anything else, RJ, before we go?
I'm just
anything else you want to add?
I hope I do not get flamed for my Boston College take.
I hope some Florida State fan finds that and comes to get you.
I looked it up. The likely spread is 24.5.
I told you.
Hey, Boston College last year, Florida State, 31-29. Florida State won, and the spread was like 25.
Okay, this isn't last year.
Okay, I'm just saying, Boston College, gotta give them a chance.
Okay, well, we'll see. It's gonna be fun revisiting this if you're right. Lord of mercy. But anyways, guys, we will be back next week. We're kind of going to be discussing, with the transfer portal being closed, we're going to kind of take a look at the roster and just kind of see where Georgia Tech stacks up, where we thought they improved, where we thought there could still be some improvements. We'll get into that next week. We kind of wanted to wait because while the portal did close, I think there's due to some paperwork or stuff, it can take kids 48 to 72 hours to appear in the portal. So you could see some kids pop up in the portal. We just want to make sure that there's no surprises or anything, and we can talk about the roster being intact as it is. So we'll come to you next week. But that's going to do it for me and RJ today. Thank you guys for listening along, and we will see you next week.